Welcome to Blockhouse Bay Baptist Church Online. We're glad to have you with us on this second Sunday of Advent, the 5th of December. Can you remember a time recently where you were just so moved by something that you couldn't help but just stand up and to clap your hands and to woo and dance around and do things like, yeah? Can you remember a time where you did that recently, where something was so good, so moving, so unbelievably worthwhile that you couldn't help but to stand up and cheer and celebrate? Well, in our kind of area of where we live, our reality might be so good that we don't find a need to celebrate to that degree. Sure, maybe it's a game that you stand up and cheer a bit. Maybe it's a birthday present that you're excited and a little tear rolls down your eye for someone's thoughtfulness. Or maybe it's just, getting a Christmas bonus or a new job where you pump your fists a bit. But we might have it so good that we don't cheer like that very often. But I've actually always found it interesting to watch on the news where different countries, and I'm more familiar just thinking about some of the Middle East, of the Arab Spring and some of Syria, when Saddam Hussein or Hosni Mubarak from Egypt, when they were moved on from power, that you could see people out in the streets celebrating and chanting and cheering and just so thankful that these people who had held oppression over them, who had ruled with an iron fist, who kept society in a way operating, but also in a way that produced fear and concern and caution. And so when these regimes changed, people couldn't help but celebrate and just to go crazy with gladness. Now, why were they so glad? Just to have something put away? Or was it for the hope of what was going to come? Well, I actually think it's for the hope that was going to come, where life was going to be so different, and they were looking forward to that with hope, which brought about this joy. Well, as we're in the second Sunday of Advent, we're also talking about this idea of joy. And the text that we've asked you to read is Isaiah chapter 8, verse 19 through chapter 9 through 7. And here you have a people who are experiencing either the promise of or the actually impending reality of the Assyrian army, the army from south of Egypt, coming up and oppressing and overwhelming the people of Israel, where they were now in oppression, with brokenness, with burden, with anguish, with darkness around them. And they were weighed down by this difficulty. But Isaiah, who is both telling Israel, look, part of this is your doing. You've gone after looking for idols to tell you what to do. You've looked to align yourself and be in alliance with those nations that you shouldn't be. You did not seek God's face. And so part of this is your deal, and part of this is just the consequences for turning away from me and not trusting me. But I want you to be in hope. I want you to be in hope, and so Isaiah speaks of this prophecy. And we pick that up in verse 1 or verse 2 of chapter 9, where it says, the people who walk in darkness. Again, those who are overcome walk in darkness. They've seen a great light. And those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You've enlarged the nation, increased their joy. They rejoiced before you as people rejoice at the harvest. Yes, we have enough food to eat. As warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder, yes, we have victory over our enemies. All these things, this yoke of burden, this rod of oppression has been taken away. The clothes of war have been burnt. For to us a child is born, a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Oh, of the greatness of this government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness. From that time on and forever, the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Can you imagine being a people who are oppressed who have rods of oppression and burden upon you. You cannot do what you want to do. You are afraid to go out and live a normal life because you are being hemmed in. Things are not right. Things are not good. They're unjust. Fear, concern, hunger. Life like that is not enjoyable. Life like that is not at peace. Life like that is whimsical because you don't know what's going to happen. And yet the promise of Isaiah is that there is a son who is coming. He will be a king. Well, we know from this text that in its own context, there was looking forward to likely being what might have been Hezekiah or someone after him who was going to take up the throne after Ahaz had ruined things. And this one is going to bring hope to the people of Israel. But we also know in reading through the Old Testament and reading through Chronicles, if you're following along, that those kings continue to both seek God and then fall away. And so nobody actually completed this prophecy. But when Jesus comes on the scene, right, what's the first thing that the shepherds do? They hear this word from the angels. It says, good news of great joy we bring you, for unto us, like there's this child, this king that's coming for everyone. And go to Bethlehem and check it out. Good news of great joy. And in Matthew 4, it brings up this text and says, out of Galilee comes this light. There's going to be someone who brings a kingdom that's going to come, that's going to rule with justice and righteousness. So friends, we realize that the Old Testament was looking forward to someone in their context, but it wasn't quite complete. And so when Jesus comes on the scene, there's a recognition that who Jesus is and what he's doing, the way that he interacted with the poor, the way that he interacted with the powerful. He challenged and welcomed, right? Pushed on those who are powerful and unjust and welcomed in those who are poor or oppressed and sought to bring healing and wholeness, sought to welcome people into God's presence, not by sort of rules, but by welcome as a person. And he also unmasked evil in the powers that be in power by allowing himself to be crucified on the cross in an unjust way, to overcome evil and death, to bring new life and resurrection life. So this Advent season, as we look forward to Jesus coming, we realize that Jesus doesn't just come to bring salvation in a spiritual way. He's going to forgive my sins and ease my conscience. But in line with the Isaiah prophecy, Jesus comes to be king, a king who begins to rule through the hearts of his people, yes, in a spiritual sense, but also in a very tangible physical sense. Think about all the things that the people of Israel looked forward to and enjoy. They were dancing around, celebrating because they could experience life differently. People were going to be honest and trustworthy, right? You could go to the judge and they were going to be impartial. They didn't care if they were rich or poor. They were going to give you justice. The systems set up in the society were good for everybody, not by bribery, not by my kind of culture versus your culture, not by education versus yours, but rather that everybody had an opportunity in God's kingdom to know him well and to operate together as neighbors without fear of oppression, fear of burden, fear of hunger, fear of these things that are part of an unjust society. Jesus was coming to bring a new kingdom come. And the people who were a part of that were also part of helping to bring that and to live it out. So, church, as we look forward to Jesus' coming at Christmas, Jesus promises to bring joy. And as we look forward at the second coming of Jesus, where he promises to come and to fulfill what he began, of that kingdom that will rule and reign in fullness, in justice and righteousness, we have to understand that we are a part of God's kingdom come. As we live in Jesus' ways, we are called not just to be kind, but to actually seek justice and righteousness in the way that we live, in the way that we live with each other. So how you work, as we've said, with character and with presence, how you treat your families and your neighbors, all these things where we talk about honesty and encouragement and being truthful and looking out sacrificially for others and caring for the needs of the poor and the oppressed. when we don't get caught up in thinking we were taken care of so we don't have to worry about others, that Jesus comes to build a society, a people who are the salt of the earth, light of the world, that is showing that God's kingdom is not just about salvation and forgiveness that's in my heart and soul, but really in the world that we live in. So when we think about joy, joy is that truth or that built or comes out of hope, right? We hope that God's going to do these things and we trust that because he's faithful. But the joy then is that celebration that we can have, that we know that when God's kingdom is in place, we can eat with each other and not be afraid someone's knocking on our door to drag us off to jail. We can go to a restaurant and know we're going to get a fair price. That we know that we can go to the hospital and that we'll be treated because they're there to care for who comes and to do the best they can. Not because you make enough or not enough. Not because you're kind or you have certain education or certain cultural background. Those things don't matter. We're people in God's kingdom. But justice works its way in through all these parts of our society. And that's why we're called to live upright in lives of character and Christlikeness in seeking the good of others, because that is what brings about joy. The knowing that the goodness of being with people, being with family, being with friends, doing a good hard day's labor, knowing we're going to get a fair wage, all those things are part of a just kingdom. So let's celebrate what Jesus has come to do and begun in our lives and in the lives of this world, and keep celebrating to know that God will make all things right in his time as we look forward to his second coming. So glad to celebrate in joy what God has done in our world through Jesus Christ. Let's celebrate with joy. Peace.